I can't use cleaner on the table because it, and as some of you read my book, the first book that starts out with a story of a Hui foreign affairs director at the Zhongyang back in and he invited me to visit Hui areas, and I thought, wow, he's Hui, he's Muslim. He came to my room and he said, what is that? I said, well, it's this cheese. Oh, I can't have cheese. Why can't you have cheese? Well, there might be pork. Yeah, but you told me you're not a Muslim. Well, yeah, you're right. I'm not a Muslim. I'm Marxist. I'm the foreign affairs director. I believe in Marxist-Leninism. And I said, but, okay, so you're not a Muslim, but you're Hui, but you can't eat cheese. Well, have a beer. No, I can't have beer. I'm a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim. I'm Hui, and I don't drink alcohol. And all these things, even though he claimed not to be religious in any way, I would argue that probably later in life he'll become more religious. But in this period of his life, particularly younger people are not very religious. And it's this category that we can talk about. What I talk about in my more recent book, it's in my more recent writings, I've been working with nomadic Muslims, Kazakhs. I'm talking about the movement of culture. Now culture moves and adapts and relocates, and often dislocates the host culture. One of the charts from my earlier book, I put back in this talk because I was talking with Gordon earlier, and he showed me a copy of my book, and I noticed he had noted that chart. It's one that didn't get picked up very often, not very referred to, but it's actually taken right out of Christianity and studies of Christianity. Some of you know I went to seminary. I studied Hebrew, Latin, and I'll tell you this group. At one point I was an ordained Baptist minister, American Baptist, so I studied something about Christianity. I was very interested in Christianity in China, and I still am. I am working on a larger comparative project looking at Judaism, Islam, and Christianity in China. That's an interest of mine. But this comes right out of Lyman Huber. And one of my professors at Fuller Seminary, where I went to seminary, was an anthropologist, passed away 2 years ago, Paul Huber. And this idea of adaptation to local culture, of Christianity, was very meaningful. It helped me understand how the Hui, at one era, could be very close to Chinese culture. But other Hui Muslim groups could be very distant. And these groups advocated using only Arabic, being very withdrawn from Chinese society, Wahhabi, Salafi groups. Whereas other groups were very adapted to Chinese society. And in the middle you have these Sufis. I'm probably more of a Sufi today than I am anything else. And I like the fact that Sufism isn't necessarily Islamic, the mystical tradition of Islam, but Mevlana Rumi argues that it's this adaptation of the principles of religion, loving your neighbor as yourself, as you would have view of treatment as you have to be treated. These grand principles are in all religions. So this adaptation model, I think, can be applied to many other, and helps us understand how the Hui have localized to the extent that they have things that Muslims elsewhere don't have. They have women's mosques, only for women. This is one in Ningxia and Wudong. And our friend and colleague Wang Ying will be going to the Middle East and learn more about how women have adapted Islam in the Middle East. But she's also traveled to many of these women's mosques in China. And here you see the Si, a women's, and Si could be temple or mosque. Levi Si, Levi Tom. Here we have Qingzhen, so it's a study hall. But indeed, it's a separate mosque. The question is, how do you translate mosque? How do you translate Islam? How do you translate imam? All these often Hui used Persian terms, not Arabic terms, because of the Persian ideas. This is one village I did a lot of field working outside of Beijing. It was also a women's prayer hall. It's just adjacent to the mosque, but separate for women. Now, this does not exist in the Middle East. It does not exist anywhere else in Islam, except in China. So it shows you how, and nobody can really, even some people now really study this, nobody's really giving me a good explanation of why in China. Particularly what I've called, when I've written about women in Islam in China, the triple web of not only Islamic patriarchal culture, but Chinese culture, and then Confucian patriarchalism. So they have all of these sort of three strikes against them, and yet they've survived. And now that may be one of the reasons. But so we know that the Hui and the Uyghurs have survived. There's several other groups we don't have time to talk about. But I would argue that all of them could be looked at in this way of greater or lesser localization of their Islamic practice to Chinese society. Many of them are very marginalized, particularly the groups in Qinghai and Gansu, the lowest levels of education. And I'm very worried about their situation in this economic downturn. Most Westerners are interested more in Tibet than in the Muslim marginalized groups. But with this economic downturn, I'm concerned when people are focused on China rising, what if China stumbles in this race and this sort of economic trajectory? What will happen to China if it can't keep this developmental pattern going? And particularly when we looked at the Olympics, the focus there was very much on a rising China, a long history, a unfolding scroll, a scroll that became a stage. And this is where I picked up this notion of staged developmentalism, I call it staged primitivity, that China has now emerged on the world stage, is shoulder to shoulder with leading nations in the world, and indeed is winning in many areas, as it did in the Olympics. But what will be the future for China if this trajectory does not continue? Now we know the big problem for China, like the United States, is that in 1993 it became an oil importing nation, and this is when competition for Middle Eastern oil took place not only in the United States but with Japan. And this is when the China threat scenarios became much more written about and the fear. What I think is forgotten in the West is this long history of trade and adaptation to its environment without expansions, without colonization. China has accomplished this trajectory through trade, not through invasion, not through war, not through occupation. And I think that is a commendable thing, particularly when you look at China's foreign policy efforts